Hello there, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Train Crash podcast. Today, we're doing controversial opinions. And just a little quick disclaimer before we get into this video. As with any opinion on the internet, we're allowed to have our own. So if you don't believe with what we're saying, or don't agree with us, then let us know in the comment section below. Be nice about it. And yeah, hopefully we'll have a little bit of discourse in this podcast, as well as in the comment section as well. Because I think that's something that we really enjoy, is the discourse with you in the comment section. So yeah, please do feel free to comment if you agree or disagree. So yeah, we've got a note of some topics and things that we'd like to discuss during this, some opinions, and we're just going to jump straight into it. Now, this one's informed on something that we recently saw on Facebook, and it's new or young modelers are not interested in developing new skills.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting and quite controversial one to start off with, because certainly once you've been modelling for a couple of years, you kind of look back and you think, wow, I've learned so much. But when you think maybe how you felt when you were first beginning, as I certainly felt, I was overwhelmed at the opportunities, the potential and the complexity that comes up in all the different topic areas in the hobby. So it definitely did take me a while to get my head around maybe the limitations of the materials and stuff I was working with, as well as like, wow, this is such a big hobby. And to try to make it as affordable as possible for myself, I'd have to do a lot, by myself. So I'd have to learn how to ballast, track lay, wire up electrics, fit decoders, that kind of stuff. And I think that comes down to what sort of modeler you kind of are as well. I mean, we'll probably discuss this in a future podcast, is kind of our theory on different types of modelers. But we kind of have train set modelers that aren't as interested in progressing. And you kind of have modelers that maybe are not as such train set modelers. They're more kind of modelers that want to create more realistic interpretations of history, I guess. And I find that the train set modelers may be less interested in developing the skills because they maybe want something different out of the hobby compared to the people that are more serious modelers from the get-go and want to develop the skills to get that more realistic kind of layouts.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think this Facebook post that it stemmed from was worded horribly, as much as I could see what he was mentioning with it. He was kind of suggesting that young people, and I've included new modelers in this because I think in the comment section it was leaning towards new modelers as well, have too much free time and whatever, but it's by the by to discuss that. But yeah, I think sometimes there isn't a positive reinforcement within the hobby to say, don't worry if you mess things up, because you can rectify those issues. And I think that's something that I still struggle with now as a modeler. And it's something that I hope in a couple of years' time, when I look back at where I am now as a modeler, hopefully it's something that I've overcome, because I'm still afraid of messing things up. And I think that's something that a lot of new modelers have, especially with expensive ready-to-run items and things and whatever. Well, like, let's say brass kits, because that's what this post was about. People not learning how to use brass kits. Now, they mentioned Judith Edge kits in the comments section. Now, the cheapest one of them, for a locomotive at least, is around £42. They go up sharply from there, but that's the cheapest one. Now, though that's cheap for a model, it's still a considerable amount of money on something that you could mess up. Yeah, and that's the reason why I've not dipped into brass. And I think that's the reason why we've seen the growth in 3D printing and things like that.
Can I just pop in there? That's 40-50 quid just for the body or just for the chassis. When you start looking at wheels and motors and particularly gearboxes to go with that, you're looking at maybe adding, £50 to £100 on top of that, depending on the size of the loco.
Definitely, and it's a whole new ball game to get your head around the different gear ratios and how to make things look prototypical and non-prototypical and things like that. And I just think, as you mentioned, it can be overpowering. And I think the hobby is naturally overpowering with how developed it is in itself. And I think that, yeah, sometimes that people do just get put off. I've not dipped my toe into brass kits because I don't want to mess it up. That's the reason why I'm dipping my toe into 3D printing kits. in 3D printed kits rather, because if I mess it up, then I know that it's relatively easy and cheaper to rectify that. And I still think that that's something that a lot of people do cope with, especially with regards to weathering and things like that, and modifying locos. And for in the separately detailed parts, I've seen multiple people discussing about how that overpowers them and overfaces them. And I think that, yeah, as you mentioned before, it can be what different people want from the hobby, but sometimes people are just scared, if I'm being completely honest.
Yeah,
And I know a lot of people
yeah.
who are.
I mean, I've been modelling for 5 years now, and personally, I class myself as a modeler who's kind of learned fairly fast. And I class myself as someone that pushed myself in lots of different situations to learn new skills and to, just to push the boat out, put a model on the line and just say, I'm going to risk it. I'm going to go for it. I'll see what happens. I hope I'll be able to fix it if it goes wrong. I feel like I'm quite progressive in that way, and kind of, I guess, kind of adventurous, but kind of quite reckless at the same time to go for it like that. And I've been I like that for about 5 years now, and I'd say I've tried lots of things, but I've not tried a full etched brass loco kit. However, I feel like I'm probably going to build up to that. I mean, I've built loads of plastic kits of wagons. I've built loco kits in terms of bodies, like a combination of etched kits and 3D printed. I've worked in lots of mediums trying to get that, but I'm still not at the same level as just off the bat doing a brass kit. And I remember when I first started modeling, I thought, wow, the people that can build in brass are kind of like the top of the food chain of modelers. And I kind of still look up to it in that way, because obviously let's be honest, if it was an easy material to work with, we'd all be working with it right now. If we could all, if Loco could be scratched out of brass that easily, none of us would buy Ready to Run. But the truth is, it's actually quite difficult to work with brass, and I feel that even though I'm where I'm at now, it's going to take me a couple more years, maybe 5 more years, before I start building full-on brass loco kits or scratch building in brass. And so to say that to a first-time modeler, as you're not trying, you're not interested in developing skills, is just quite ridiculous, actually, because I've worked very hard. I mean, to be fair, I've not just been focusing on loco kits, I've been focusing on scenery, woodwork, though let's be honest, it's not really improved. And all that kind of stuff, and DCC, get my head around that, and electrics, and I'm still not there. And I wouldn't say I've not tried. I'd say I've tried very hard. And so maybe there's an expectation that people learn it. Well, maybe not expectation. There's not that kind of gratitude set out there, but there's not the appreciation that people learn at different speeds. And some people are just good at different things, Some people are just absolute naturals when it comes to weathering. They've weathered a couple of locos and it already looks like a professional job, if not even better. So I think there's maybe not that allowance for different types of learning. And also, and I'm rambling on a bit now, but in that post it touched on how much time beginners had. And unless you're retired, let's be honest, your time is going to be limited because you're either probably at work or you're looking after children, or you're in school, or you're busy somewhere else, because a lot of people now don't have as much free time. This is kind of changed in lockdown, but to generalize, it hasn't, and people don't have that same amount of time or dedication to be able to put aside 10 minutes a day every day to learn the art of making brass loco kits.
Mm-hmm. And I think the price thing is a natural link to that, is that I can't afford to chuck away 40 quid on a locomotive body kit and however much on a motor and gearbox and chassis and wheels and whatever. I just can't afford that. And I class myself as a relatively lucky modeler with the certain funds that I can get towards the hobby. And I think that sort of status as such, the kind of like that certain people look at new modelers in, can be really detrimental to them. And but something that kind of does tie on to them is, what about the people who don't model at all, or display case modelers? Don't let the locomotives run, just pop them in a display case. Are they dangerous to the hobby?
I think this is quite a bold word to describe it. Obviously, they're helping manufacturers, particularly the manufacturers that produce limited editions, so whether that's gold-plated logos. So I still really struggle to understand why anyone would want a gold-plated logo. Like, even as a collector, why would I just want something clad in 18-karat gold? Like, to me, it just looks completely wrong and just a way to rip people off. But I suppose if you've got the funds for it, I mean, why not? If you're not going to run it as well, you don't need to worry about the mechanism wearing or anything like that. Or really ornate limited edition logos in beautiful liveries like SECR Lines Green. I know we just had a pod a couple episodes ago, but for me, it's just such a beautiful livery that really stands out as a collector's favourite.
And it's one that's got ready to run with it, so it's a natural one to go to.
It is.
It's got
yeah, definitely. So obviously they are pouring money into manufacturers, but at the same time, they're probably not helping the hobby as a whole, because they'd only be purchasing logos which are, predominantly made by Hornby and Bachmann. They aren't necessarily going and buying track from Pico or scenery suppliers or anything like that. So they are kind of putting a bias on buying logos, but they do kind of create a culture of collecting. Now, there's nothing wrong with collecting logos. Let's just, I'm going to put that straight out there. If you collect logos, we've got nothing against you. It's a hobby. You can do it. You can do it however you want, really. So I wouldn't say they're dangerous. I would say they maybe risk skills being passed on, or that kind of idea of there's a lack of development in skills, which could maybe influence other modelers not doing so. But I don't see them as dangerous. It's in a weird way. I kind of see them important to the hobby, because we kind of need a variety of modelers in the hobby for it to work. We need people that love rounded outs, we need people that love end-to-end, we need people that love mainline and industrial. And I feel like collectors just kind of fit in a category of that as kind of they impact the hobby. But I definitely wouldn't say they're dangerous, I don't think.
Yeah, I think that they are somewhat of the lifeblood of certain companies, especially when they say, you mentioned limited editions and things like that. Excuse me. Chances are they will be bought by collectors. Like, for example, I've got a Scalextric Braun GP limited edition Jensen Button thing that was done in about 2009, 2010. Right, now, if you look at my models, I'm constantly messing about with my models, modifying them a bit, sticking dumb buffers or toolkits on them, various different things like that. But that model of the car has never ran, and it never will run in my ownership. And that's because I see it as a collector's piece, and that is a limited edition of about 2,000, I think it is, or 2,000 or 5,000. And obviously, certain models are like that. People reckon that the initial batch of the SEC or green C classes were of about 1,000, which is mental considering they were in the main range. It was something to do with Bachmann not believing they'd sell very well. Just look at it now. But yeah, I think that they are somewhat of the lifeblood, because those limited editions that cost more money allow manufacturers to do more things. Or like the limited editions commissioned by certain firms allow both firms involved, the manufacturer and the firm that's commissioned them, to develop further. I mean, the National Rail Museum collection, was it called Locomotion, that commissioned it?
Yeah, it is.
For Bachmann.
With Rapido, I think.
Yes,
well.
so they've done bits with Rapido, they've done bits with Bachmann. They've done bits with Hornby as well, with part of the national collection. That's really, really good, because it's helping to fund those models. And I think collectors will obviously... if we were to stereotype collectors now, they are very affluent, so have the ability to splash out on limited editions which demand more money than the normal ones do. And I think that's good, because it helps everybody by giving the manufacturers and the firms they're buying it from a bit more cash.
It does, and I think we may be focusing too much on the model railway side of. I mean, railways itself is a hobby, whether that's enjoying heritage or rail tours or train spotting or model railways. I feel that model railways is kind of like a sub hobby of, or sub interest of the wider railways, if that makes any sense. And the collectors, though they may collect locos that they've maybe seen in the real world or limited editions or something that's just special to them, they may be supporting the wider railway hobby in other ways that we don't see or we don't know about. They might be a trustee of a preservation society, or they might be a regular traveller on a heritage railway, or they might, go on rail tours or something like that. And so I think it's important not to forget that they may be benefiting in other ways that may also indirectly benefit the model railway hobby.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of looking at it. And I think sometimes you can be all like secluded in the way that we are looking at the model railway hobby in general, because the model railway hobby needs the real railway to survive, whether that be in preservation or the mainline. And I've mentioned it before, but I really like the way they did it. The DJM for their 1361s, if you bought it through Kerno, I believe, £5 of either all releases or the release of the model that's the release of the locomotive that's been preserved. £5 went towards that preservation effort. And obviously that's just another case of how model railways link with the real world of railways and how collectors are helping fund that. Because I'm sure a lot of those locomotives were bought by collectors because they were seen as the ultimate 1361. And did them in the liveries like the photographic grey, which I think is a collector's livery.
It is, and it's kind of a novelty, as we'll talk about in our previous podcasts. Moving on to a slightly different topic in the railway media, whether that's magazines, Facebook, or kind of what Hornby and Bachmann like to release in other manufacturers. Do you think there's a bias for Great Western kind of layouts?
Yes. Do I think that that's backed up because more people model Great Western? Probably. It's just if you think about a model railway, you think of a nice idyllic branch line, single or double track with a little tank engine running on it. And 90% of the time you'll think about a little Great Western layout.
That's true. And I think sometimes when someone is to stereotype a steam train, like a mainline train, Great Western designs are probably very similar to what they're imagining. Simple valve gear, a big boiler, 6 driving wheels, whatever. I don't know where I'm going with this point here, but I'll roll with it.
Because it's the stereotype of what certain people would think of, wouldn't it? Because if I went into my little brother's room and now asked him to draw me a train, he'll either draw something vaguely Great Western or he'll draw an A4.
Yeah, and interestingly enough, a lot of Great Western and Southern engines as well, unfortunately, have a slight grudge against Southern Railways. But I'll try not to let that. Maybe a bit more than slight. I'm not a fan, but we can't talk about that now. Barry Scrapyard, a lot of Great Western Southern engines went to Barry Scrapyard. So, in terms of the preservation effort, Great Western locos are very popular. And there's a huge amount of Great Western fans because it kind of, as we said, it had that idyllic branch line, but also the glorious, magnificent main line. It had kind of two faces that were both very attractive. And I guess that maybe appeals to modelers as well, especially if they want to justify a variety of stock or a variety of settings. And Great Western engines did get a fair bit around the country as well.
Well, exactly. You ended up with some where you like to model in Scotland. Obviously, certain parts of the Midland region were handed over to the Western region. But I think another part of it is that in Ready to Run, a lot of the more interesting parts of the Great Western network available in Ready to Run. So things like the auto trains, so either the 14, the 64s, and the 45 rather XXs that were auto train fitted. Most of them, bar the 45s, I don't think there's been a 45 that's been released in Ready to Run with the auto train equipment. But auto train equipment is fitted to 14s and 64s in Ready to Run. So are the auto coaches. Now, Webb coal tanks, which have been released in Ready to Run, there's no LSWR equivalent released in Ready to Run, so you can't really run auto trains there. So it's just the interesting side of modelling that you think, oh, that's interesting, so I'll model it. Great Western kind of has that. The auto trains are fascinating, the pannier tanks just so different to what were available elsewhere. And yeah, I think then it's natural narrow gauge line, which people are fascinated by. I myself have included. The Vale of Rheidol is probably one of the most interesting places I've ever visited railway related.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about the Great Western compared to maybe the other members of the Big Four, although it is important that we're also talking about Great Western areas modelled kind of during the British Rail era, is the amount of history that the Great Western Railway had. And the logos that it had, a lot of them were very historic. And the thing is, with the LMS, the Only on the Southern, they'd kind of shun older designs away. You know, they'd put them on secondary lines, freight, whatnot. But Great Western, though it did do that, the locos, given that they were older and kind of a lot of Edwardian looks to it, they had a lot of style to them as well. They certainly looked the part, even the uglier freight engines. So I think that game's a lot popular because they do look nice, and I do love Great Western Green.
Especially the early Great Western Green that was a little bit
Great Western is probably, the express engine. I do think the bias to Great Western is somewhat justified because, let's be honest, if a lot of people want it or are interested in it, then that's what the market and the media are going to provide.
Definitely, and I think that it's an interesting thing to note is that the Great Western's had an impact on the media in general, not just the model railway media or even the railway media. Things like the Titfield Thunderbolt, that's got a couple of 14XXs in it. I'm just trying to think of what the TV shows were called, but a lot of them had Great Western based engines in them. I think that might have been a 16XX. It was one of the small panniers that was in a kids' drama show. So yeah, I think that it's interesting to note that it's got a wider impact in the media, and that might impact people's decision to model them. I believe one of the big reasons the 14XXs were so popular is because people liked them in like Titfield Thunderbolt and things like that.
Yeah, I think people's memories of it as well, because Great Western Steam lasted for a while. And there's certainly no shortage of footage of them running on branch lines and mains. It's a very popular place to visit for railway photographers and railway documentaries. So maybe that kind of abundance of photos, videos, and people's own experiences is contributing to maybe this bias. But I think it's probably a good thing.
Do you think there's... Okay, sorry, just to kind of... Just an interesting thought I just had. Do you think it's somewhat impacted by the fact there's now a mainline GWR back again? Do you think that people are drawn to the fact that there was an old one, it died, and then the new one's come about? Do you think that's had any impact on the amount of people modelling it or not? Because I know a lot of people who have bought the 800s in the Great Western livery because it's a really nice livery.
I personally absolutely love the 800s in Great Western. I love the HSTs in Great Western as well. I don't think it maybe means that people will be modelling kind of the original, if you like, the Great Western as much. But I can see where you're coming from. I mean, it's maybe difficult to measure. But I could see a lot of people buying modern Great Western stock and then thinking, oh, we'll get a pannier as well. You know, it's an incredibly iconic design as well. And that's something the Great Western Green. It's kind of panniers in the railway enthusiast eyes are almost as recognisable as like an A4 in terms of the shaping, and there's lots of variations of pannier tanks, but you can't get the idea of them. So over the last 20 years, we've seen so much integration of more modern technology. So this kind of controversial statement is making the hobby integrated into the 21st century, you know, such as Hornby releasing analog, or they're going to release app-controlled analog train control, is leaving older people in the hobby behind, and this is kind of a bad thing. So what do you think about that?
I think that obviously anybody being left behind in the hobby is a bad thing. And if I'm honest, I feel like obviously Hornby are probably the biggest company out there. So they've got the biggest advertising. And a lot of the advertising is about this app control. And if you're just a casual person, think about getting into railways, and you click on the Hornby website and they're advertising the app control, it might put you off if you're not interested or might not want to do app control. So I think maybe you've got companies like GageMaster who will always produce analog controllers like the Combi and various ones like that. But if you don't know about those companies existing, you only think about Hornby, then yeah, I think it will put some people off. I think that it is interesting to note that this technology was very similarly brought in with Scalextric's Arc control, I believe it was, which was an app-controlled system. I'm not sure that was for whether that was for their digital system or analog system, or it might have been for both. But from what I understand from how that went down in the slot car community, it was kind of a bit meh to the people who were in the hobby, but it drew loads of people into it because people like app control. Just look at the amount of app-controlled drones that are available that are kind of like the baseline for drones before you go into getting the big ones with the cameras and laser cannons on them and stuff. A lot of people start out with app control because it's something that they're used to. They're used to playing with apps. So maybe that's something that it's positive for, is that we've got these combi controllers and like the other analog controllers that are knob based. I never thought I'd be able to get away with saying that in a podcast. I'm gonna go with it.
I'm gonna have to save that for the outtakes episode, but I'm gonna have to alter it so it makes it sound saying something different then. Yeah.
So like, I think if you know about the knob-based controllers and you're interested in knob-based controllers, then obviously you'll go down that route. But it's introducing a whole new set of people to the hobby who like playing with apps and things. But yeah, I think that if you don't know about those older style knob controllers, then you'll understand. Sorry. Okay, professionalism, right. So yeah, if you don't know about those knob-based controllers, then obviously it's going to be a bit of an issue. But maybe with a little bit of research and with the availability like GageMaster on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, as well as obviously through Google, if you just search analog controller, I'm sure GageMaster are one of the first companies to come up. So I think that it's not leaving anybody behind as long as they do that little bit of Googling.
I mean, personally, I think people are going to be left behind. We've already seen people being left behind just with the advent and kind of rising populism of DCC control. And there's a massive, massive debate. And this is one of our other controversial statements, is DCC worth it? But we'll branch onto that in a bit, probably. Mm-hmm. But because it's such a different system, like DCC and analog, there's just very little to compare. I mean, I guess for you, some of the DCC controllers do have a knob on it, but that's as similar as they get, because you've got to alter the decoder, you've got to put decoders in the trains, you've got to wire louts differently, you've got to use a different controller system, and you've got more options. It's a lot more complex. And so I think we have seen a lot of people left behind, but they're not made to feel like they're doing something wrong or being left behind is bad, because people can choose what system they like to operate, and there's really no criticism for them. For example, on Facebook, there's Facebook groups for DCC users and analog users, and there's kind of there's no kind of tension between those two groups because people can do what they want. I think there's definitely a group of people that have been left behind, but while some people have been left behind, like you said, some people might really be drawn to the app control that Hornby can offer. Now, we're still to see the success of this in reality, but I think it's got a lot of potential, and personally, I'm kind of tempted by it just to give it a go, because it's 30 quid-ish, which is not that far off, or roughly the same price as a GageMaster Combi, just because if I say I was going to try some 009 again, if I can get my head around and stop breaking stuff, or just on a piece of track just to see what it's like. Because I think that's got a lot of potential, and kids might be more interested in it as well, because when you look at an analog controller, say the ones that come with train sets, it's very plain. You've got like a little dial to change the direction and a knob to adjust the speed, but on an app you have so many more features that can be added for essentially not much more on the price, like a little button that makes a horn sound, or a really simple chuff chuff sound or something like that. I think it's got a lot of potential, and it's maybe introducing more people to the hobby.
Yeah, definitely. I think, if I'm honest, obviously I'm not in the slot card community. The information I was using for their app control for Scale Electric's own one was just kind of based on what I vaguely understood from reading some forums when I was tempted to make the swap back to slot cars a couple of years ago. And yeah, though their system's been in for a couple of years, I think it's 2 or 3 years old, I think. I don't think they're still yet to fully feel it, although they are still producing the sets with it in, which can only suggest good things. I know a lot of people who like the knob-based DCC or just analog controllers over the more calculator-styled ones, as you can get in some DCC systems, just because they like the feedback feel. And I think that I mean, I've got a Prodigy, which has kind of got both button and knob based, and I enjoy using both. I'm very fortunate in that case that I do have a controller that can use both. But I think, yeah, a lot of it will come down to what the people use it for in the long run. Because if you start off with that based, you might want to swap from it because you find that you're missing something. Or like people who start with the E-Link system, which was a computer system. And from what I understand, the app-based system is like an advancement of what an analog E-Link would be. And yeah, I know a lot of people who used E-Link and have gone to two controllers. Yeah, I know a lot of exhibition layouts where they operate using the E-Link system or very similar systems by different companies that maybe slightly more complex because it aids in the operation of their layout. And I think a lot of it is layout-based and model-based.
Yeah, and I think this progression in technology is inevitable. It's not only happening in the model train world. You only have to look at progression in mobile phones in the last 20 years. Like the iPhone, the first ever iPhone was released in 2007. In third, let's say around that era. In less than 15 years, we've seen it go from a fancy Nokia brick with a touchscreen to a phone with like 50 gazillion different cameras, a massive battery, a massive screen, processing speeds on par with some laptops. And it's like we're going to see technological progression in any area we look at. So I guess if model railways weren't going to progress at all, we'd be very left behind kind of from other hobbies that might use more up-to-date technology. So I think it is kind of inevitable, but I would like to say that there are really easy ways to convert from analog to DCC. My first DCC controller was the Bachmann Easy, well, it's not EZ, but you get the idea. Easy command system. Now, this only had 9 local addresses, and it resembled an analog controller plus 10 little buttons and some very, very basic function keys incorporated into those buttons. And so there are easy ways to progress from analog to DCC if you'd like to. And I think that's important now that is kind of there. But again, that's maybe a kind of more affordable way to move across than just jumping in the deep end with an NT power cab, which is what I've got, or Gauge Master Project like you do. But it is a very daunting process. What would you say?
Why don't we? I was going to just say, why don't we discuss whether DCC is worth it now?
I was literally about to say the same thing.
Oh, it's cute that, isn't it? That we can finish each other's sentences. It's just a shame that we're on a podcast and it just seems like we're talking over each other. But yeah, is DCC worth it? Yes. If you're somebody who operates a layout that will need DCC. If you're not, then it makes no sense to convert. Unless you're going to use the positives of DCC, because you can't lie, it is an additional cost, especially if you go down the sound route or if you go down the stay alive route, such as you have or whatever.
Well,
it is, and it's another thought that you have to do when you're buying a locomotive is what sort of chip do I need to fit to this or whatever, or you have to learn to hardwire and various different things like that. But if you operate a layout that needs DCC, then obviously that's all worth it. If you're operating a layout that doesn't need it, or you don't want those extra additional features, then no. I think sometimes, and I think, as you mentioned with those two DCC and non-DCC groups, I think sometimes people can get a bit tribalistic. I don't think people online help this at all. Certain publications and certain RM web threads or YouTube channels or various different things like that can sometimes make it seem tribal, whether it's like, I'm DC, I'm DCC, we shouldn't get along because we operate our trains differently, sort of thing. And I think sometimes that kind of takes away from all this that we are all railway modelers.
Yeah, and something I'd just like to put in really quickly is I am an absolute sticker for Stay Alive. All my small locos, that's 060s and kind of smaller, all have high capacity Stay Alive. And I've actually got a separate video on my channel about fitting Stay Alive. Cheeky plug to me right there. Go check it out if you're interested. But you mentioned about the expenses. You can fit high capacity Stay Alive with a decoder for the same price, if not a little bit cheaper, than a £20 Gauge Master or Zen or Zimo chip. So let's pop that in there. So
yeah, it's dependent on what you want from it, isn't it?
It's very dependent, and we've both got, when we converted to DCC, there are loco fleets have substantially grown since we both converted. We both started off with small loco fleets, so the controller was probably the largest expense. Decoders kind of, we had a small fleet, so it didn't matter. We could convert them over time, and we could kind of spread the costs. Decoders, the latest DC stuff, check them out on eBay, £10 each. You cannot go wrong with them. I use them pretty much on my locos. I feel like I'm plugging a company we're not even being sponsored by, but happy customer.
They would like to sponsor us.
I would love some more decoders. You know, if they gave me some decoders, surely it would justify me buying more locos.
And they could send some to me because I've not trialed them yet.
Absolutely.
Right, we're not just spending the rest of the podcast
we're going to have to
free stuff.
No, we're not that sort of stuff.
I think DCC is something that from the day it was created, and it's various different guises, whether that be the Hornby 01 system or whatever, it's always split opinion, and if I'm honest, it always will. Because some people will just want to leave a train running, and that's them as modelers, and that's good. That's another person in the hobby. But equally, there's going to be somebody who wants exactly timed trains using advanced DCC systems with point throws and lights that are operated not by sensors but by computer programming and things, and that's good. We're all railway modelers, and I think, is DCC worth it? Just depends who you are and what you want.
I mean, I converted DCC primarily because I wanted to have the greater level of train control. I wanted to be able to leave all my trains on the track and operate them one at a time without worrying about isolated sections or anything like that. I just wanted it. It felt like it's almost simpler than analog, I guess, as well, because the track, you just wire everything live. It just seemed like such an easier step for me. And I figured out most of it out myself through trial and error, but also by YouTube videos. So there's a lot of support out there. And I came in it from that perspective. It's going to give me greater control. And for me, it just seems to have got better and better and better, because once I dug more deep into it and started exploring different routes, so the Stay Alive route, the sound route, the sound route is very expensive. It is good, and I do enjoy it. Though I think it's a little bit overpriced. That's why TTS sound is quite good, actually, quite good value for me, I think. But the Stay Alive route has just blown me away. The fact that I can just avoid all the frustration that I get from having dirty track and stuttery analog locos. I mean, that's why I never bought any small locos. I kind of had a mental criteria on my wish list of locos that they had to have at least, 8 wheels for me to actually want them. 8 wheels of pickup, that is. For me to actually want them, because I know they'd be a reliable runner. And I found it so frustrating when I started off in the hobby, when locos would just stutter and jutter and just wouldn't run nicely. And for me to be able to invest in a system that provides flawless running, however clean my track is. Now, it sounds bad, but I clean my track maybe once every 3 to 4 months. And so, confession time, my biggest modelling secret is I don't clean my track that often. And that's because I don't really need to. And even then, I only clean it out of, I say habit, but it's not really. It's just kind of thinking, I probably should clean it at some time. Same reason I kind of clean my room. Yeah. And so the fact that I could avoid all that frustration, because it just made me not want to operate. It would just mean that every time before I ran analog trains, so this isn't saying you can get good at running out of analog small locos, because you certainly can. I just think it requires a lot more maintenance than it does with DCC. And that's something I love about it. I love the stereo aspect, and I also love the sound. I think it adds so much more kind of realism. And let's not forget, you can also fit lights and you can have like analog trains, but you can't have them on when there's no power on the track. Lights and also smoke generators and stuff like that. It's just you unlock so much more potential in your models. And though DCC
that might
may
be
not
potential.
So what you got?
No, I was just going to say that potential is what you might have on analog. Say like smoke units, as you mentioned, you can operate on DCC. Lights, you can flickering smoke box, things like that. But personally, I find DCC just gives you that little bit more control over when it happens and why it happens.
Yeah, and for me, it's the main. My absolute love of DCC is to stay alive. It just means I avoid frustration and I actually want to operate trains. And it's led me on to exhibit as well, because without good running trains, I wouldn't exhibit. So all this kind of DCC, for me, it's difficult to maybe put a price on how much I'd have paid at the beginning. And it obviously is expensive. There's no way around it. A baseline system can cost you £40 to £50 second hand. But a good system will set you back maybe £150 plus. And that's not including all your decoders. So it is a big investment. But I spread the costs over a long period of time. It's taken me 5 years to get where I am with DCC. And even then, I only feel like I'm really scratching the surface. So for me, in terms of cost and effort, DCC is absolutely worth it. But I kind of understand it's not for everyone. If you've got a large loco fleet, or if you maybe don't run trains that often anyway, and you clean your track before you operate, or you don't really have small locos to worry about stay alive, I don't think DCC is necessary. And sometimes for kids as well, it's just easier for them to have a more understandable system, because it's kind of good to be able to understand how the trains are working so you can troubleshoot and problem solve with them.
Yeah, and I think DCC, as I mentioned, I went DCC when I came back to the hobby as such. And I'm glad that I did, because as you mentioned, like sound and various different things opened so many doors for me. But it's also that I found that because I'm not buying a locomotive every month, I'm very fortunate, as I mentioned before, in the fact that though I am on a budget, it's not the world's smallest budget, but there's by no means enough for me to go out and buy a new locomotive every month. But every couple of months, if I do find a locomotive that I would like, then the chip is a cost, but I can factor that in and I can save up a little bit longer to afford the locomotive and chip at the same time. And I think if you are thinking about going DCC, just trial it with like a cheap Hornby Select or something like that. I've had a Hornby Select for a while, and that actually was pretty good actually. And just watch things on YouTube about it. And that does bring me on to my second question, because we both mentioned YouTube and like learning things from that. Only established modelers should be able to be posting stuff online. That's my controversial opinion.
Oh, that's a. So I've been on YouTube for 4 years now, I think, and that kind of documents right from the beginning. Right from the beginning when I can't even describe how bad my layout was. Pretty bad. There's a reason why I deleted a lot of those videos. Definitely not my voice before it broke.
Prepubescent
voice.
A reason.
Yeah, prepubescent voice. Today I'm going to be talking about trains. Yeah, I don't know where to carry on from this now. So I think I liked it at the time because it allowed me to document my journey. But looking back, I look back at some of the tutorials I did and I think, oh man, please will no one follow my advice. Like, I don't know what I was thinking. Like, that is just, I mean, I deleted a lot of tutorials that were mostly bad advice, or there's better alternatives to doing it now. But I just look back and I think, well, it's all right. It's not great. And I kind of think if there's lots of people that are maybe not as well established or skilled, try and take the roles of channels that maybe are. Now, that sounds a little bit weird, but I'll explain it to you. So I think that the higher skilled channels are good at producing tutorials because they've got the experience. They know the correct methods, the best materials. And chances are they've been in the hobby for a long time. They're fairly experienced, and they've probably messed stuff up by themselves, and they've worked out the solutions to that kind of problem. And so I think they're really good for sharing video tutorials. whereas a beginner maybe isn't. Just because someone might follow that tutorial and the tutorial might be completely wrong, or they might have not given it long enough to experiment with, or something like that. I mean, some of the tutorials I deleted, I was recording the video on my first attempt of like even trying this stuff out. So you'll be pretty pleased that most of them didn't get more than 50 views. And thankfully, no one ever commented down below saying this doesn't work. I wouldn't be surprised. Because sometimes the methods were a little bit all over the place. But that's not to say that young modelers, or I say young, young in the hobby, can't post. Yeah, new modelers can't post online. It's more maybe, I mean, this is maybe a bit picky, but maybe it's more content based. So I've got no problem with someone posting a layout update, or we've got to include our and Facebook in this as well, haven't we, rather than just YouTube. Yeah. But I've got no problem with someone posting a picture, or maybe recording a running session. But for me, the problem kind of lies in maybe potentially misleading people with tutorials and that kind of stuff. Though it's difficult to gauge how long someone's been modeling, because they might have been modeling X number of years before they started posting online.
Yeah, and I can get where you're coming from. I mean, I've been on YouTube about 2.5 years-ish, depending on when this podcast goes up. But no, it is about 2.5 years. And in that time, I've seen my modelling skills develop. I've also seen who I am as a modeler develop. Like, originally I was very much get it out of the box, do the separately fitted details, and that's it. Whereas now, I'd like to think a little bit more further on in my skills, and I've got a couple of how-tos on there. And I think that, I mean, I've kept all my videos up, if I'm honest, because I quite like looking back on them at times, just to see how far I've come. I don't really like my voice, because I hadn't quite developed a persona that you could carry through. It was just kind of a very shy, timid Midlands boy. But I think that, obviously, people do flock to the big channels, and chances are the big channels are the ones that are the more experienced models because they've been on YouTube longer. This question actually did kind of stem from a particular comment from a relatively big YouTuber. I won't mention him by name, but he was talking about people's lighting and people's audio not being very good. Judging by our last couple of podcasts, with regards to my audio at least, we shouldn't be up at all with regards to audio quality. But I think that was more picky than anything else, if I'm honest. Because the brilliant thing about YouTube is, if you don't think something will work, or you don't like the way that somebody's video is set up, you can click on. And I don't think in the grand scheme of things, somebody doing a video is going to affect somebody else very much in a negative sense. And I think, like, you mentioned your how-to videos. Chances are most of the people who watch that were looking for that how-to elsewhere. And if I'm being completely honest, were any of those how-tos unique to YouTube? Like, were they the only ones on YouTube?
I don't really think so. I think I was trying to catch on trends like, this is how to ballast, but I did it wrong. So I'm sorry if any of you have followed my advice. I'd like to say that you can probably trust my advice now. I'd like to also hope that a lot of people have had common sense to ignore my stupid mistakes. But yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, obviously, but we're coming at it from the point of YouTubers who, one of us is a little bit smaller than the other, I won't mention who, but it's the one who can't sort out his own audio. But I think that, I don't know, I think sometimes as YouTubers you are guilty of trying to jump on it, but equally from a YouTube consumer point of view, sometimes you just want to watch something, and if you don't like someone's audio or setup or whatever, or you think the lighting's too dark, then you can always click on. And I think that's a big thing with regards to it. And I think everybody deserves a voice in the hobby. So, like, people normally kick off about certain review channels. A very close friend of mine had it with somebody who was not very nice to him on Facebook at all, about the fact that his layout wasn't ballasted, and how that kind of invalidated his opinion on the model, despite the fact it was a review rather than a how to ballast or anything like that. And yeah, it kind of, I remember he was a bit shaken by it because it was just somebody being a not very nice bloke to him. It was just that, again, it kind of shows that tribalistic view that sometimes people can have that I mentioned earlier. But it's like, if someone is just reviewing it, then people can just talk through what is there, the history behind it, and things like that, without having to have an extensive knowledge on how to build a layout or whatever. It can just be somebody talking about their opinions on a model, because that's all a review is.
Yeah, can I just say, if I see another video about hunt couplings, I'm literally going to go mad. Like,
Unless they want to sponsor this podcast.
oh, I've just seen so many videos of them. I'm just so fed up. I don't even watch. I watched the first couple of them. Fed up. Everyone says the same thing about them.
But there you go. You've not clicked on them since, so then there's no real issue. Then is there? It's just that you don't like them coming up in your recommended section, which is why you should watch more Oliver Rowley videos, because I've not done one video on hunt couplings.
Congratulations. I'm very, very impressed by that. So, any more points you want to add? Because I'm conscious that we've been rambling on for quite some time now. Probably bring us to a close in a minute.
No, if I'm honest. I'm kind of run out of ideas to say.
Ran out of steam. No pun intended.
Wait. Choo. Oh no, this train's going to crash.
Whoa, yeah.
Myself out.
Are you trying to plug us in a weird way there?
Please don't unsubscribe.
Okay. I think we're kind of coming to a natural end here. So just as can we have one last plug? Okay, so we have just launched our own range of model railway kits. Now, these are a great way to dip your toe into kit building, into loco bashing, into modifying your own locos to have a more unique kind of flavours them, and also make them slightly more industrial. We have got some more awesome kits in the way, so go check out the eBay store in the link below. Links to all our socials. We live stream every Monday on Instagram, which is less formal than this. I mean, this is pretty informal as well, but it gets pretty worse, bit more crazy. Sometimes we even do name calling on it. Wow, that's crazy. That's on the live stream on Monday. We also have regular Instagram posts. And yeah, thanks for watching. And hopefully we will see you in a new podcast very shortly. All right, bye. Stay safe.
Peace.